for what Lauren has talked about, please put them in the Q&A. But to begin with, I'm going to bring Jack back in just to go through some of these quite specific questions that we've had in the Q&A. But maybe from these, Jack, you could expand into areas. Yeah, see how we go. So the first one is from Rohan Jaskira. What software did you use to get the dashboard record tracking the move?
So this is a good example of where we haven't gone all the way with digital. What would be lovely, there's a Microsoft thing called Power BI where you can produce really amazing live data visualizations of your data. Transport for London use it to show how busy tube stations are and where there's cycle docks and that kind of thing. I would love to say we'd done that, but we didn't need to. And that what we've got is effectively a semi-automated process, so that data comes out of our systems and we pull it off on a weekly basis into spreadsheets, which are then translated into graphs which go onto a PowerPoint for monthly reports. So we see figures weekly and we see those nice reports like I was showing you monthly, and that's good enough. We could have invested further. If we were doing a commercial activity, you almost certainly would want real-time data reporting on it, but we didn't need that for our project. So it was an example of, let's go so far, let's make it visual. This is still 1,000 times better than we had before, which was me asking the conservation manager, so how's it going? So we've got data, we are using it, but we didn't actually go the full automated way with it.
Working on a project with an organization who are in a similar kind of position, they have a ton of data, they know they need to communicate it and visualize it so the people above them can make proper decisions. But they waste so much time in a manual, taking things from one spreadsheet to another, combining it all together, that they've now put into their strategy to try and figure out Power BI. It's like, we know it's going to, it takes an investment, it's going to take time, but in future that's going to save us so much more time and probably convince people better by making the graphs a bit jazzier too. The second question, sorry, you're going to say something, Joe? No. Was the entire budget signed off in one go? And was budget threatened by the pandemic, or had it been completed before then?
So the budget, we released it in stages basically because we were also up against a deadline. So like most organizations, we have a process of going through, large organizations anyway, through funding gateways where you get some money up front to start developing your project, and then you go back when you've got more cost certainty. So it was a bit like that. We brought on a small team to start off with, and then we scaled up when we were a bit further along the line. But we were driven also by a deadline of needing to vacate this building so that the government could sell it. So there was always that at the back of our minds. We couldn't wait around to develop the perfect solution. So in terms of the pandemic, it slowed us down. We obviously ground to a halt like everybody else for the first couple of months. And then after that, because we were working in confined museum stores with no ventilation systems, we had very limited numbers of staff able to work in the space at once, which slowed us down. So it ended up costing us more. Was it in doubt? Not really, because of the bigger set of circumstances surrounding the project, but also because as we went into the project, suddenly it became quite superb that we had spent the last couple of years digitizing everything, or digitizing a proportion of the collection. Our curators, by now making the rapid transition to working from home, were able to see the objects despite the fact they could no longer physically access them. And our audiences online were growing very rapidly in those first months. And we were able to use that content in our social media and in other work that we did all over the Science Museum group. So actually, if anything, it really justified the investment that we had made as well. I think you can't, if you get the infrastructure right, it will repay you in ways you haven't foreseen, as well as the ways that you had planned.
I think there's a recent story about the Natural History Museum. It made X amount of millions of pounds from its digitized collections, or it digitized its millionth thing or something. I think that made the international press, and DCMS thought it was a great thing, even though DCMS hadn't actually done anything to encourage it. The Natural History Museum had just done it themselves. But yeah, that's almost the point I was saying at the very beginning of infrastructure, making these opportunities available, whereas before there just wouldn't have been. So you're completing your projects, but also then creating the conditions for things to be built on top of this infrastructure. Something else you said, I'd like to come back to that point. We'll just get through these next two. Richard Hall has asked if there's any viable alternative to modes, and that's a specific type of software, isn't it?
Quite specific to museums. So a lot of smaller museums use a piece of software called Modes, which has a lot of virtues, I would say, because it's really simple, which if you're in a small organization without tech support is to be valued. I can't. There are pros and cons to all software. What I would say about Modes is you don't have to do everything in it, even if you're still using it. So it has a great affordability advantage for small organizations as well as the tech support. But it has perfectly good import capability